While they were eating, Javy and the chief talked. After a few sentences, Javy translated them into English. Nate ate, listened, and watched the village for Rachel. She wasn't there, the chief explained. She was in the next village looking after a child who'd been bitten by a snake. He wasn't sure when she'd return. "He wants us to stay here tonight in the village," Javy said. Nate wished he'd brought the satellite phone. Josh must be very worried. They hadn't talked in almost a week. Lawyer Valdir took the early call from Mr. Stafford. "I haven't heard from Nate O'Reilly in days," Stafford said. "We have had many storms down here." "You haven't heard from your boy?" "No, they are together. The guide is very good. The boat is very good. I'm sure they are well." They agreed that Valdir would call when he heard something from the boat. Valdir walked to the window and looked at the busy streets of Corumba. There were many stories about people who entered the Pantanal and never came back. Javy's father had piloted the river for 30 years, and his body was never found. Welly found the law office an hour later. Valdir came out to see him. "Who are you?" he demanded. "My name is Welly. Javy hired me to work on the Santa Laura." "Where is Javy?" "He's still in the Pantanal. The boat sank. Javy and Mr. O'Reilly left in a small boat to find the Indians." "When?" "A few days ago." Laco found Nate and Javy as the sun was falling behind the mountains. Nate followed the boy along the trail to Rachel's hut. She was standing in the door. "I'm sorry about the little girl," Nate said. "She is with the Lord." She sat outside the door. The boy stood under a tree, almost hidden by the darkness. "I cannot invite you into my home. Only married people can be indoors at this time of day." "How long did it take you to get used to living here?" Nate asked. "A couple of years. I missed home for 3 years, and there are times now when I would like to drive a car, eat a pizza, and see a good movie. But you adjust. I became a Christian when I was 14 years old, and I knew that God wanted me to be a missionary. I put my faith in him." "Can we talk about Troy?" The shadows were falling fast. They were 3 meters apart and could still see each other, but the darkness would soon separate them. "If you must," she said, her voice tired. "Troy had 3 wives and 6 children that we knew about. You, of course, were a surprise. He didn't like the other 6. He left them almost nothing, just enough to cover their debts. He gave everything else to you." "I haven't seen Troy for 20 years. "That's not important. He left his fortune to you. I have a copy of the will for you." "I don't want to see it." "And I have some other papers which I'd like you to sign, maybe tomorrow morning. Then I can be on my way." "What kind of papers?" "Legal stuff, all for your benefit." "You're not concerned with my benefit." Her words were much sharper. "You don't know what I want or need. You don't know me, Nate, so how can you know what's good for me?" "Okay, you're right. But it is very important for you to see these papers and sign them. All the heirs must tell the court, either in person or in writing, that they understand the will. It's required by the law." "And if I refuse?" "Honestly, I haven't thought about that. It's routine. Everybody always cooperates." Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she changed the subject. "Do you have family?" she asked. "I've had a couple. 2 marriages, 2 divorces, 4 children. I now live alone." "Divorce is so easy, isn't it? We marry, then divorce. Find some..." Josh met Judge Wycliffe and showed him the video of Troy Phelan signing his testament. They watched the first part of the video without comment. It began with old Troy sitting in his wheelchair being examined by the psychiatrists. The examination ended with the agreement that Mr. Phelan knew exactly what he was doing. Wycliffe smiled to himself. The room cleared. The camera across from Troy was kept on. Troy took out the second will and signed it 4 minutes after the mental examination had ended. "How are they going to sort this out?" Wycliffe asked. It was a question with no answer. Rex and Libigale had already started to contest the will. The other heirs would quickly do the same. "What about the will he signed first?" Wycliffe said. "He didn't sign it." "But I saw him. It's on the video." "No, he signed the name Mickey Mouse. From 1982 until 1996, I prepared 11 wills for Mr. Phelan. The law says that with each new will, the old one has to be destroyed. When he signed the new one, Mr. Phelan and I, burned the old one. He enjoyed it. He'd be happy for a few months, then one of his kids would make him mad, and he'd start talking about changing his will. If the heirs can prove he wasn't sane when he signed that handwritten will, then there is no other will. They were all destroyed. His estate will be divided between all his children." "Why would he give $11 billion to an illegitimate daughter who's a missionary? Sounds a little crazy, doesn't it?" "You think that Phelan was crazy?" Wycliffe asked Josh. "No. Strange and very mean, but he knew what he was doing. Find the girl, Josh. We're trying." The next morning, Rachel spoke to the chief. "He thinks there'll be a storm," she said to Nate when the meeting was over. "He says you can go, but he will not send a guide. It's too dangerous." "Can we get back without a guide?" "It wouldn't be wise. The rivers run together. It's easy to get lost. Even the Ipicas have lost men during the rainy season." "I need to get back," Nate said. "This trip has already taken too long. We have to talk." "I have to go to the next village for the funeral of the little girl. Why don't you go with me? We'll have plenty of time to talk." Laco led the way. Rachel followed him, then Nate. He tried to persuade Rachel to take the money. "If you had lots of money, you could buy lots of medicine. You could fill your shelves with all the medicines you need. You could buy a nice little boat to take you to Corumba. You could build a hospital and a school and spread Christianity all over the Pantanal." She stopped and turned. "I've done nothing to earn the money, and I didn't know the man who made it. Please, don't mention it again." "Give it away! Give it all to charity." "It's not mine to give. It'll be wasted. Millions will go to the lawyers, and what's left will go to your brothers and sisters. And believe me, you don't want that. Those people will cause a lot of unhappiness if they get the money." She took his hand. Very slowly she said, "I don't care. I'll pray for them." They stopped by a stream for a few moments to rest. "You said last night that you were weak," Rachel said. "What does that mean?" "I'm an alcoholic," Nate replied. "I've hit the bottom 4 times. I have no money. I'm in trouble for non-payment of taxes. I may go to jail, lose my license, and not be able to practice law. You know about the 2 divorces. Both women dislike me, and they've poisoned my children. I've wrecked my life." "Anything else?" Rachel asked. "Oh, yes. I've tried to kill myself at least twice. Once last August, then just a few days ago in Corumba. I almost drank myself to death on cheap vodka." "You poor man." "I'm sick. I have a disease. I've admitted it." "Have you ever confessed to God? He won't help you unless you ask." You have to go to him in prayer. He can forgive all your sins. Chapter 10. Fever. The storm never came. When Rachel returned in the mid-afternoon, she and Laco went straight to the chief and reported on events in the other village. She spoke to Nate and Javy. She was tired and wanted to sleep before they discussed business. Later, she and Nate walked down toward the river to the narrow bench under the trees. They sat close, their knees touching again. "Every village has a local doctor," Rachel said. "He cooks plants and roots to make his medicine. He calls up spirits to help with all sorts of problems. These doctors are my enemies. I'm a threat to their religion. They attack Christians. In a village down the river, I had a small school where I taught reading and writing. It was for the Christians, but it was also open to anyone. A year ago, we had malaria, and 3 people died. The local doctor told the village chief that the people were sick because of my school. They were being punished. The school is now closed. The parents of the girl who died are Christians. The local doctor said he could have saved the girl, but the parents didn't call him. He blamed me for her death, and he blamed God. During the funeral today, he began dancing and singing. I couldn't finish the service." Her voice cracked slightly, and she bit her lip. She couldn't cry in front of the Indians. She had to be strong all the time. But she could cry with Nate, and he would understand. "I think you should go now," she said suddenly. "I think I saw a case of malaria in the other village today. Mosquitoes carry it, and it spreads quickly. Trust me, Nate, I've had malaria twice and you don't want it. The second time almost killed me." It never occurred to Nate that she might die. If she died, it would take years to settle the Phelan estate. And he admired her greatly. She was everything he wasn't, strong and brave, happy with a simple life. "Don't die, Rachel," he said. "You're a good man. You have a good heart and a good mind. You just need some help." "I know. I'm not very strong." He had the papers in his pocket. "Can we discuss these?" She read the will slowly. "Troy didn't care for his other children," she said. As they moved away, he waved at Rachel and the Indians. At the first turn in the river, he glanced over his shoulder. Rachel and the Indians hadn't moved. He was sweating, even though it was cool. His arms and legs were wet. "I'm sick," he thought. Javy noticed him, and after a few minutes said, "Nate, are you okay?" He shook his head no, and pain shot from his eyes to his spine. "Javy, I think I have malaria." "How do you know?" "Rachel warned me. She saw it in the other village yesterday. That's why we left today. I have a fever, and I can't see." Javy stopped the boat and shouted to the Indians. He quickly unrolled the tent. "You will feel cold and shiver," he said as he worked. "Have you had malaria?" "No, but most of my friends have died from it." "What? Bad joke. It doesn't kill many, but you will be very sick." Moving gently, keeping his head as still as possible, Nate lay down in the center of the boat. Javy spread the tent over him and secured it with 2 empty gas tanks. The Indians were beside them. Laco asked Javy what was happening. Nate heard the word malaria. Then they left. Twice the canoes slowed as the Ipikas discussed which fork of the river to take. Javy kept their boat 100 meters behind. He couldn't see Nate under the tent, but he knew his friend was suffering. Laco was concerned about the American. "What should I tell the missionary about him?" he asked Javy. "Tell her he has malaria." Nate heard their voices. The fever burned him from head to toe. His skin and clothes were wet. His mouth was so dry that it hurt to open it. The storm followed them but didn't catch them. Javy thought they would find Welly in the Santa Lura by dawn. The Indians were tired and ready to stop. Finally, they found a spot and landed. Laco explained that he'd been the missionary's assistant for many years. He'd seen lots of cases of malaria. He looked at Nate. "A very high fever," he told Javy. "The fever would go away, but there would be another attack in 48 hours. The oldest guide began talking to Laco. He translated for Javy, telling him to keep in the center of the river. In 2 hours, they would find the Paraguay. In Corumba, Valdir called a doctor friend and persuaded him to meet them at the hospital. They raced through town in Valdir's car, ignoring lights and signs. "Did you find the woman?" Valdir asked Javy. "What did she say?" "I don't know. I didn't really talk to her. I think she liked our friend back there." Nate was curled tightly in the back seat, hearing nothing. The doctor studied the rash, which began at Nate's chin and stopped at his waist. He was covered with mosquito bites. "Looks like dengue fever," he said after 10 minutes. Because he was a rich American, Nate got the best drugs in the hospital. The fever dropped a little. The sweating stopped. "His temperature should fall soon," the doctor told the nurse. "I'll see him again early in the morning." Nate was sleeping heavily when the nurse took him into a room with 5 other patients. He didn't see the open sores, the uncontrolled shaking of the old man next to him. He couldn't smell the waste. Like his father, Rex Phelan was good with numbers. He realized that 6 law firms were doing the same work. 6 firms fighting the same fight, each wanting a big slice of the pie. It was time for the family to get together. He decided to begin with his brother, T.J. The 2 brothers met in secret. Rex began with a Sneed story. "This is enormous," he said. "It could make or break our lawsuit. Sneed will say he was the only person with Dad when he wrote the will. He wanted $5 million, but he only wants $500,000 now. We'll find some way not to pay him the rest. We have 6 law firms all attacking the same will, and they all expect to get rich when we settle. How much are your boys getting?" "How much is Hark Getty's getting?" Troy asked. 25%. Mine wanted 30. We agreed on 20. Troy Jr. was proud that he'd made a better deal than Rex. "Let's play with numbers," Rex continued. "Imagine we hire Sneed, and he says all the right things. The estate wants to settle. We each get maybe 20 million. 5 goes to Hark Getty's, 4 goes to your boys. That's 9. So we get 31. But if we join up, then Hark will cut his fee. We don't need all these lawyers, TJ." "I hate Hark Getty's. Why don't we fire him and stick with Mike?" Chapter 11. A New Beginning. It was the middle of the night when Nate finally woke up. He rubbed his sore eyes. His forehead was very hot. He was thirsty and couldn't remember his last meal. In the darkness of the room, somebody moved from bed to bed, finally stopping beside Nate's. She touched him gently on the arm. "Nate," she whispered, "it's Rachel." "Rachel?" he whispered. "I'm here, Nate. God sent me to protect you." He reached for her, and she took his hand. "You are not going to die, Nate," she said. "God has plans for you." He could say nothing. Slowly his eyes adjusted, and he could see her. "It's you," he said. Or was it another dream? He rested his head on the pillow. His muscles relaxed, and his joints became loose. The heat left his forehead and face, and he fell into a deep sleep. He dreamed of girls in white dresses floating in the clouds above him. They sang songs he'd never heard before, but they somehow seemed familiar. He left the hospital at noon the next day, against his doctor's advice. No one had seen Rachel at the hospital. Nate had whispered his secret to Javy, who had asked the nurses. After lunch, Javy began walking through town on foot, searching for her. No one seemed to know anything about a white woman arriving from the Pantanal. In Valdir's office, Nate phoned Josh Stafford. "The fever is gone," he said. "I'll come home in a couple of days." "Okay. Tell me about the woman." "She's not interested in the money. You can't talk this woman into anything. I tried, got nowhere. So I stopped." "Nobody walks away from this kind of money, Nate. Couldn't you talk some sense into her?" "No, Josh. She is the happiest person I've ever met, perfectly content to spend the rest of her life working among her people. It's where God wants her to be." "She signed the papers?" "No, sorry, boss. I tried to make her sign them. She'll never sign them." Javy found no trace of Rachel, and he began to doubt his friend's story. Dengue makes you see things, makes you hear voices, makes you believe in ghosts. Nate searched until the end of the week. He walked the streets, watched the crowds, checked out hotels and sidewalk cafes, and saw no one who looked like Rachel. On his last day, he stopped at Valdir's office and collected his passport. They parted like old friends and promised to see each other soon. They both knew it would never happen. Javy drove him to the airport. He wanted to spend time in the United States and asked for Nate's help. "I'll need a job," he said. Nate listened with sympathy, not certain if he himself was still employed. "I'll see what I can do," he said. The lady in the seat next to him on the plane ordered a beer. Nate studied the can. Not anymore, he told himself. He closed his eyes and asked God to give him strength. He ordered coffee. Hours later, the plane dropped through the clouds. In Washington, the earth was covered with heavy snow. Josh was waiting for him. "I thought you could stay at our place for a couple of days," he said. "Thanks. How do you feel?" "I'm fine. A little weak, that's all." They rode in silence for a while. Traffic was slow. Then Nate announced, "I'm not going back to the office, Josh. Those days are over." "Why?" "Let's just say I'm tired." Back at the house, he told Josh about his adventures in the Pantanal. He talked about Rachel and described her in great detail. He used her exact words when he talked about the money and the papers. "If she won't take the gift from Troy's will, the money remains in his estate," Josh said. "If, however, the heirs can prove Troy was crazy, then there is no will. All 7 of his children will share equally in his estate. If Rachel doesn't want to share, then her money will be divided by the other 6. They'll get $1 billion each." "Why are we fighting for the will if Rachel says she doesn't want the money?" Nate asked. "First and most importantly, my client gave away his estate as he wanted. I want to protect his will. Second, I know how Mr. Phelan felt about his children. He really didn't want them to get their hands on his money. I share his feelings. I hate to think what they'd do if they got $1 billion each. Third, Rachel could change her mind. We're going to fight, Nate. But Rachel needs a lawyer. St. Michael's had a population of 13,000. There were stores on both sides of the main street, old buildings side by side. The house was on Green Street and had a view of the harbor. The front yard was small and under almost a meter of snow. Nate parked his car and fought his way to the porch. Inside, the house was neat and organized. Josh said a woman came every Wednesday to clean. But there was no coffee, and this was the first emergency of the day. Nate locked the doors and went into town. It was Sunday. All the stores were closed. Nate studied their windows as he walked along. Ahead, the church bells began. Nate went into the church. It was a handsome building, but there were few people inside. Father Phil Lancaster, a little man with thick glasses and curly red and gray hair, stood at the front. They struggled through the songs and prayers. Father Phil noticed Nate sitting in the last row, and they exchanged smiles. Sitting in the warm little church, safe from fevers and storms, safe from the dangers of the city, Nate realized that he was at peace. God was pulling him in some direction. He wasn't sure where, but he was no longer afraid. As he left the church, Father Phil grabbed Nate by the hand. "Welcome," he said. "Welcome to Trinity Church. I'm Nate O'Reilly from Washington. I'm staying in the Stafford house for a few days. Nice to have you with us. When did you arrive?" "This morning." "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Then you must join us for lunch. My wife makes soup every time it snows. It's on the stove now. Please, our house is just behind the church." Phil was already pulling Nate's arm. "What brings you here?" he asked. "It's a long story." "Oh, wonderful. Laura and I love stories. Let's have a long lunch and tell stories." Why not? Thought Nate. There was no food at the house. At the back of the church, Laura was turning off the lights. Phil introduced her to Nate. She had short, gray hair and looked older than her husband. She wasn't surprised to have a guest for lunch. As they ate, Nate told them about his trip to Brazil. In his story, the storms grew fiercer, the boats smaller, the Indians less friendly. When he finished, the questions began. Phil wanted to know about the missionary, her faith. Chapter 12. A Letter to Rachel. Mary Ross fired Grit early Monday morning. Hark Geddes now had 3 of the 4 heirs from the first family. His percentage had dropped to 17.5, but the sum he could earn was enormous. He called a meeting to tell the other lawyers. The back of Wally Bright's neck turned red with the news. He would kill Geddes if he tried to steal Libigale. "Stay away from my client," he said loudly. "We know the game you're playing. We're not stupid." Sneed came in, and Hark introduced him to the group. "Now, the lawyers for the other side will ask you a lot of questions first. So for the next hour or so, assume that we are the enemy." Hark began asking questions. Sneed handled them well and relaxed. Then Ms. Langhorne asked Sneed about the Phelan families. "Did you know about Rachel Lane?" she asked. "I haven't thought about that," Sneed said. "What do you think?" he asked Mr. Geddes. Hark was quick with the fiction. "I guess that you knew everything about Mr. Phelan. Rachel was 10 or 11 when you went to work for Mr. Phelan. He tried to reach out to her over the years, but she would have nothing to do with him. So if he left her everything, it shows that he was crazy." Sneed repeated and expanded the story. When he finished, the lawyers were pleased. They all began to help Sneed find answers for difficult questions. For 3 hours they built his story. Then for 2 hours they tried to tear it down. At one point he was nearly in tears. When he was exhausted, they sent him home and told him to practice his answers. Poor Sneed drove home in his new car. He was determined to give them what they wanted. Nate planned to read and write through the morning. His plans were changed by a phone call. "Are you busy?" Father Phil asked. "I'm at the church working in the basement. I need some help." Nate thought about the soup. There was plenty of it left. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he said. Phil was measuring wood in the basement. "I'm building 6 classrooms for Bible study," he said. It was a big job, and Phil worked very slowly and took plenty of coffee breaks. As they worked, they talked. Nate talked about some of his troubles, including the problems with the government. "What will you do?" Phil asked. "I have no idea." "Do you trust in God?" "Yes, I think so." Judge Wycliffe entered his office at 12:30. "Josh tells me you found the richest woman in the world," he said. "Yes, I did, about 2 weeks ago." "And you can't tell me where she is?" "She begged me not to. I promised." "Will she appear in my court?" "She doesn't have to," Josh explained. "She knows nothing about Mr. Phelan's mental state, so she can't be a witness. We can proceed with a lawsuit without her." "I need a letter from your client saying that she's seen the will and knows what we're doing." "Yes, Judge," Josh said. Judge Wycliffe began to ask questions about Rachel. Questions were dangerous. Wycliffe mustn't know that Rachel didn't want the money. Josh interrupted. "You know, Judge, this is not a complicated case, and everybody's anxious. Why can't we start the lawsuit as soon as possible? Get all the lawyers in one room now and make them produce a list of witnesses and documents. Then set a trial date for 90 days' time." "What about you, Mr. O'Reilly? Is your client anxious to get the money?" "Wouldn't you be anxious, Judge?" Nate asked, and they all laughed. That night, Nate began a letter to Rachel. He had the address of World Tribes in Houston. He would mark the letter private and address it to Rachel Lane. Someone at World Tribes knew who and where she was. There must be some way to contact her. He wrote the date, then, "Dear Rachel." An hour passed, and he tried to think of words that would sound intelligent. Finally, he started writing about the snow. Did she miss it from her childhood? There was 1/2 meter on the ground outside his window. He told her that he was acting as her lawyer and explained what was happening about the will. He told her about Father Phil and the church and the basement. He was studying the Bible and enjoying it. He was praying for her. When he finished, the letter was 3 pages long. Nate read it twice and thought she'd like it. If she received it, he knew she'd read it again and again. Nate wanted to see her again. The story appeared in the newspapers on Friday morning. It said that Rachel Lane was acting through her lawyer, Mr. Nate O'Reilly, to fight the people who were contesting her father's will. Mr. O'Reilly had tracked down Rachel Lane, shown her a copy of the will, discussed the various legal issues with her, and become her lawyer. The Phelan lawyers were astonished by the news. The brown envelope was sent to the desk of Neva Collier, organizer of South American missions. It was addressed for Rachel Lane, missionary in South America, personal. Inside was a letter addressed to whom it may concern, and a smaller envelope. Neva read the letter aloud. "Enclosed is a letter to Rachel Lane, one of your missionaries in Brazil. Please send it to her. I met Rachel about 2 weeks ago. I found her in the Pantanal. The purpose of my visit was a legal matter. She is doing well. I promised Rachel that I would not tell anyone where she is. She does not want to be disturbed with any more legal matters, and I agreed to her request. She needs money for a new boat and medicines. I will gladly forward a check to you. I want to write to Rachel again. Please let me know that you sent her this letter. Thanks, Nate O'Reilly. It wasn't easy to reach Rachel. Twice a year, on March 1st and August 1st, World Tribes sent packages to the post office in Corumba. These included medical supplies, Christian literature, and anything else she needed. The post office held the packages for 30 days. If Rachel didn't collect them, they were returned to Houston. This never happened. Every August, Rachel went to Corumba and called the World Tribes office. In March, the packages were sent up the river on a boat and left at a farm near the mouth of the Zeco River. Laco collected them. In 11 years, Rachel had never received a personal letter. Neva copied Nate's phone number and address, then hid the letter in a drawer. She would send it in a month, with the usual supplies for March. Nate was in bed when the phone rang. A female voice said, "Nate O'Reilly, please." "This is Nate O'Reilly." "Good evening. My name is Neva Collier. I received your letter. I will send Rachel's letter to her." "Thank you. I'd like to write to her again. Have you heard from her recently?" "No." Rachel had been in Corumba 2 weeks earlier. He knew this because she'd come to the hospital. She'd spoken to him, touched him, then disappeared. But she hadn't called the World Tribes office? How strange. "Why did you find her?" Neva Collier asked. "You've seen the newspapers? You understand what her father did? Somebody had to explain what was happening, and it had to be a lawyer." "You mentioned Chapter 13, the lawsuit." The first stage of the lawsuit began on Monday, February 17th. All the people who wanted to fight Troy Phelan's will had to declare their interest. Nate could question them to see if they were acceptable witnesses. Nate didn't want to spend 2 weeks in a room full of lawyers. His attitude changed when he met the Phelan heirs. The first witness was Mr. Troy Phelan, Jr. Nate introduced himself. "Are you currently under the influence of any drugs or alcohol?" he began pleasantly. "I am not," Troy Jr. said angrily. "Which one is your lawyer?" Nate asked, waving at the crowd opposite. "Hark Geddes." The lawyers were annoyed. Nate hadn't learned which lawyers represented each client. It showed that he didn't respect them. "How many wives have you had?" "How many have you had?" Junior shot back. "Let me explain something to you, Mr. Phelan," Nate said. "I will say this very slowly, so listen carefully. I am the lawyer. You are the witness. I ask the questions, you give the answers. Now let's try again. How many wives have you had?" An hour later, they finished with his marriages, his children, his divorce. Junior was sweating and wondering when it would end. Nate used one question to lead to another. No detail was too small for him to investigate. The afternoon was even harder. Nate asked about the $5 million Troy Jr. received on his 21st birthday. "How was the money given to you?" Nate asked. "It was placed in an account in a bank." "How did you get the money from the account?" "By writing checks." "He wrote a lot of them." Troy Jr. never returned to college after he received the money. He simply partied. Nate revealed that Troy Jr. didn't work for 9 years. He played golf and football, bought cars, spent a year in the Bahamas, and lived in a grand style until his money ran out. Then he crawled back to his father and asked for a job. Nate talked about what Troy Jr. did after his father died. "You bought 2 expensive Porsches on credit. Now, 2 months later, you haven't paid a dime. You owe money for furniture. American Express wants more than $15,000. A bank is taking you to court because you owe them money, correct?" The witness nodded. Libigail came in early on Friday morning. Nate asked about her $5 million, and under pressure she told stories of good drugs and bad men. She now lived with an ex-biker and ex-addict called Spike. "What would you do if you got 1/6 of your father's estate?" Nate asked. "Buy lots of things," she said. "But I would be smart with the money this time, real smart." "What's the first thing you would buy?" "The biggest motorcycle in the world for Spike. Then a nicer house." Her eyes danced as she spent the money. Mary Ross Phelan Jackman followed. The early questions revealed that she took her $5 million and lived in Italy for 3 years. At 28, she married a doctor and had 2 girls. It wasn't clear how much of the money was left. They lived well, but were heavily in debt. Ramble came in after lunch. After a few questions, it was obvious that he was as stupid as he looked. He said that he seldom went to school, lived alone in a basement, liked to play the guitar, and planned to be a rock star soon. He played no sports, had never seen the inside of a church, spoke to his mother as little as possible, and watched MTV when he was awake and not playing his music. Gina was the last witness of the week. 4 days after her father's death, she and her husband had signed a contract for a $3.8 million house. "How do you plan to pay for the home?" Nate asked. The answer was obvious, but she couldn't confess it. "We have money," she said. "Let's talk about your money," he said with a smile. "You're 30 years old. 9 years ago you received $5 million. How much is left?" She struggled with the answer for a long time, but finally admitted that there was only $200,000 in her bank account. Her husband Cody had invested millions in bad business deals. As Nate left the city that night, he thought about the Phelan heirs. He felt sorry for them, for the way they were raised, but he knew that in their hands the money would cause pain and unhappiness. It was late when he arrived in St. Michael's, and as he passed the church, he wanted to stop, go inside, kneel, and pray to God to forgive him for the sins of the week. The next day, Nate sat with Phil on the front steps of the Stafford house. "I'm planning a trip," he said quietly. "I need to see my kids. I have to." At 8:30 on Tuesday morning, Sneed came into the courtroom. The lawyers had been coaching him for weeks. It was important that the judge believed his stories. Josh had known Sneed for many years. Mr. Phelan often talked about getting rid of him. Josh guessed that he was being paid to give evidence and had discovered that Sneed now had an expensive apartment and a new car. Sneed was ready. If Nate asked him whether he was being paid to appear, Sneed would lie about the $500,000 he had already received and the promise of a further $4.5 million. Nate introduced himself and then asked loudly, "Mr. Sneed, how much are you being paid to give evidence in this case?" Sneed thought the question would be, "Are you being paid?" not "how much." He looked wildly at Hark Geddes. Mr. O'Reilly seemed to know everything. The Phelan lawyers shrank in their seats. "How much are you being paid?" Nate asked again. $500,000, Sneed admitted. "Have you already received this money?" Sneed didn't know whether to lie or tell the truth, so he said, "Yes." $500,000 now, how much later?" Nate asked. Anxious to start lying, Sneed answered, "Nothing." "Who paid you this money?" "The lawyers for the Phelan heirs." "Did you go to them, or did they go to you?" "I went to them." Finally, Sneed was on familiar territory. "I was with Mr. Phelan before he died, and I knew the poor man was out of his mind." How long did you work for Mr. Phelan? 30 years. And you knew everything about him, right? Yes. And you didn't tell anyone that he was crazy? Sneed thought he was doing well. It was a private matter. Until now. Until they offered you $500,000, right? Sneed could not think of a quick reply. In the last 14 years of his life, Mr. Phelan wrote 11 wills. In one of them, he left you $1 million. Did you tell anyone then that he was crazy? It wasn't my job to tell. Nate continued to question him. Late in the afternoon, he suddenly asked, "Did you sign a contract with the lawyers when you took the $500,000?" A simple no would have been enough, but Sneed hesitated, looked at Hark, and then looked at Nate. Of course not," he said. Nobody believed him. Nicolette, the secretary, lasted for 8 minutes. She was 23, with few qualifications except for a nice chest, a pretty... Chapter 14. The Settlement. At the end of the week, Nate left the city. He was exhausted from 9 days of questioning the Phelan heirs. He felt ashamed. He pitied the Phelan children. He felt sorry for Sneed, a sad little man who just wanted to survive. 2 days later, Nate arrived in Salem, where his kids from his second marriage lived with their mother, Christy, and her new husband, Theo. The last time he saw them, Nate was drunk and fought with his ex-wife in the front yard while the children watched. Theo had threatened him with a shovel. Nate later woke up in his car in the parking lot of a McDonald's with 6 empty beer cans on the seat beside him. He called Christy 4 hours before he arrived at their home. "Christy, it's me, Nate," he said. "I'm in Oregon. I'd like to see the kids. Maybe tonight? Tomorrow?" "Well, sure, Nate. I guess we can work something out. But the kids are very busy, you know. School, dance class, soccer." "How are they?" "They're doing very well. We love Oregon." They agreed to have dinner the following night. That gave her enough time to prepare the kids. Theo decided to work late. Nate kissed Angela. Austin just shook hands. Christy stayed in her bedroom for an hour while their father got to know his children again. Dinner lasted an hour. At 7 o'clock, Nate said he had to go. "I have a soccer game tomorrow, Dad," Austin said, and Nate's heart almost stopped. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been called Dad. "It's at the school," Angela said. "Could you come?" Nate didn't know what to say. Christy settled the issue. "I'll be there. We could talk," she said. "Of course I'll come," he said. The children kissed him. Driving away, Nate suspected Christy wanted to see him 2 days in a row to examine his eyes. She knew the signs. Nate stayed in Salem for 3 days. He watched his son play soccer and was full of pride. He was invited back to dinner, but agreed to come only if Theo joined them. He had lunch with Angela and her friends at school. He left Salem with a broken heart. How could a man lose such a wonderful family? He remembered almost nothing about the kids when they were smaller. No school plays, Christmas mornings, trips to the mall. Now they were almost grown, and another man was raising them. Daniel, his oldest child, met Nate in a bar near the university. He was waiting with a girl. Both were smoking and had bottles in front of them. "This is Steph," Daniel said. "She's a model." The first thing Nate noticed about Steph was her gray lipstick, applied heavily to her thick lips. She was certainly thin enough to be a model. Nate disliked her immediately. "You want a beer?" Daniel asked. "No, just water," Nate said. Daniel shouted at the waiter. "How's school?" Nate asked. "I dropped out." Daniel was angry and tense. The girl was there for 2 reasons. She would prevent hasty words in a fight. Nate suspected that his son had no money, that he wanted to punish his father for lack of support. He was afraid, though, because Nate was weak and might start to slide again. Steph would keep a hold on his anger and his language. The second reason was to make the meeting as short as possible. "Why did you drop out of school?" Nate asked. "It was boring." "He ran out of money," Steph said helpfully. Nate wanted to pull out his checkbook and solve the kid's problems. That's what he'd always done. But now Daniel was 23, and it was time for him to sink or swim on his own. "It's good for you," Nate said. "Work for a while. It'll make you appreciate school." After 4 drinks, Steph was drunk, and Daniel and Nate had nothing else to say. He wrote down his phone number at St. Michael's and gave it to Daniel. "This is where I'll be for the next couple of months. Call me if you need me." "See you," Daniel said. "Take care." 2 days later, he was in Pittsburgh for his third and final meeting with his children. It didn't happen. He'd spoken twice to Caitlin, and the details were clear. She said she'd meet him for dinner at 7:30 at the restaurant in his hotel. She called him at 8:30 and said that a friend had been involved in an accident. She was at the hospital. Nate suggested that they have lunch the following day. Caitlin said that she couldn't. Her friend had a head injury, and she planned to stay with her until she was stable. She couldn't see Nate. She couldn't leave the hospital. Did she hate him so much? In a lonely hotel room in a city where he knew no one, it was easy to pity himself. He grabbed the phone and got busy. He called Phil to check on things at St. Michael's. He called Sergio. He felt surprisingly under control. His hotel room— "What does Rachel Lane plan to do with the money?" one of the lawyers asked. "I'm not sure," Josh said, as if he and Rachel discussed it every day. "She'll probably keep a little and give most of it to charity. In my opinion, that's what Troy wanted. He knew that if your clients got the money, it wouldn't last 90 days. By leaving it to Rachel, he knew it would be passed on to people in need." "We can take this lawsuit to the highest courts," Langhorne said. "Does she realize this could take years?" "She does," Josh said. "That's why she would like to discuss settlement possibilities." "Where do we start?" asked Wally Bright. For a long time they talked numbers. Then Josh said, "Nate O'Reilly has contacted his client. She will offer each of the 6 heirs $10 million. The lawyers made rapid calculations. Hark had 3 clients. 17.5% gave him a fee of $5.25 million. Wally Bright would collect $5 million from his contract with Libigale and Spike. The other lawyers would collect $2 million. Wally spoke first. "My client will settle for no less than $50 million. The others shook their heads too and tried to look disgusted at Josh's offer. They talked about numbers for a while. Then Josh said, "Rachel Lane is not a greedy woman. I think she might settle at $20 million per heir." The lawyers' fees doubled, over $10 million for Hark alone. Poor Wally at $10 million now suddenly felt sick and asked to leave the meeting. Nate was helping Father Phil when the phone rang. It was Josh. "It couldn't have gone better. I stopped at $20 million. They want $50. $50? Nate said in disbelief. "Yes, but they're already spending the money. I bet 2 of them are at the Mercedes garage right now. We should complete the deal on Wednesday." "I can't wait," Nate said. "Time for a coffee break." "We meet the judge on Wednesday," Nate told Phil. "Then I'm going back to the Pantanal to tell Rachel what's happened." "Are you excited?" "I don't know. I want to see her, but I'm not sure she wants to see me. She's very happy, and she doesn't want any part of this world." "Then why do it?" "Because if she rejects the money again, the other side gets everything." But you've already said that Rachel won't take the money. She's not going to change her mind, Phil said. No, never. So the trip down is a waste of time. I'm afraid so. But at Chapter 15, Return to the Pantanal. On Friday afternoon, Phil drove Nate to the Baltimore-Washington airport. In 9 hours, he would be in Corumbá. He and Josh had written a trust document for Rachel. The money she received would be placed in a trust named the Rachel Trust. The money itself wouldn't be touched, but the trustees could invest it and use the profits for charity work. If Rachel wanted, she would never see or touch the money. It would take only a quick signature and the Phelan estate would be closed. If she didn't agree to sign, then she must write a letter to say that she didn't want the money. She could decline the gift, but she had to tell the court. The law would then give the money to the Phelan children. How would she react when he arrived? He hoped that she would be delighted to see him, but he wasn't sure. He remembered her waving to his boat as he left. She was standing among her people, waving him away, saying goodbye forever. She didn't want to be bothered with the things of the world. Valdir had hired a helicopter which took him to the trading post in the Pantanal. His old friends Javy and Welly were waiting for him on the ground. Time was precious. Nate feared storms, darkness, floods, and mosquitoes, and he wanted to move as quickly as possible. Nate and Javy quickly climbed into the boat and set off. Javy thought it would take them 3 hours to reach the Indian settlement. The trees on both sides of the river grew thicker, and Nate began to recognize the territory. Finally, they stepped off the boat where Rachel had waved goodbye. A young Indian ran toward them. He told them to stay there by the river until further orders. He seemed scared. As they waited, Javy talked about his efforts to find Rachel in Corumbá. "I tell you," he said, "I have listened to people on the river, and the lady did not come. She was not in the hospital. You are dreaming, my friend." Nate didn't want to argue. He wasn't sure himself. A mosquito circled Nate's hand. He wanted to crush it, but instead he waited. Would his super-repellent work? His ears, neck, and face were covered in oil. The mosquito made a sudden dive toward the back of his hand, then stopped. It pulled away and disappeared. A second attack of dengue would probably kill him. Nate wasn't taking any chances. When the chief came back, he was alone. They followed him for 50 meters, then moved behind the huts on another trail. Nate could see the area around the village. It was empty. There was not a single Ipika walking about. No children were playing. No women were cooking and cleaning. There was no sound. The only movement was the smoke from their fires. Then he saw faces at the windows. They were being watched. The chief kept them away from the huts as if they were carrying diseases. He turned onto another trail, one that led through the woods for a few moments. When they came to the end of it, they were near Rachel's hut. There was no sign of her. The chief led them past the front door and to the side. Under the thick shade of the trees, they saw the graves. The matching white crosses were made of wood. They were small and stuck into the fresh dirt at the far end of both graves. The chief began talking. "The woman is on the left. Lako is on the right," Javy translated. "Malaria has killed 10 people since we left." The chief went on talking. Nate looked at the pile of dirt on the left. Rachel Lane was buried there, the bravest person he'd ever known, because she had no fear of death. She welcomed it. She was at peace, her soul finally with God, her body lying forever among the people she loved. She wouldn't want anyone to be sad. She wouldn't approve of tears. And Nate had none to give her. He'd hardly known her. But his heart ached anyway. He'd thought about her every day since he left the Pantanal. He'd dreamed about her, felt her touch, heard her voice, remembered her wisdom. She'd taught him to pray and given him hope. He'd never met anyone like Rachel Lane, and he missed her greatly. "The chief says we can't stay long," Javy said. "The spirits blame us for the malaria. It arrived when we came the first time. They are not happy to see us. He has something to show you." Slowly, Nate followed the chief into Rachel's hut. The chief pointed to a box on a small table. "There are things in that box for you," Javy translated. "For me?" "Yes. She knew she was dying. She asked the chief to guard her hut. If the American came, then show him the box." There was a second letter typed and written in Portuguese. Nate read the will again. January 6th was the day he walked out of the hospital in Corumbá. She wasn't a dream. She'd touched him and told him he wouldn't die. Then she'd written her will. Nate gave the second letter to Javy and told him to read it. "It's from a lawyer," Javy said. "He says he saw Rachel Lane Porter sign her testament in his office in Corumbá. She was mentally okay, and she knew what she was doing. It is signed by some other people as well." They stepped into the sunlight. The chief had his arms folded over his chest. He wanted them to leave. Nate removed the camera from his bag and took pictures of the hut and the graves. He made Javy hold her will while he knelt by her grave. They found the trail and headed for the woods. As the trees grew thicker, Nate turned for one last look at her hut. He wanted to take it with him, somehow transport it to the States and preserve it. Then the millions of people she helped would have a place to say thanks. But that was the last thing she would want. The chief said something as they got into their boat. "He says he doesn't want us to come back," Javy said. "Tell him he has nothing to worry about." The chief was already walking away toward his village. Nate wondered if he missed Rachel. She'd been there for 11 years. Was he sorry she was gone? Or was he relieved that his gods and spirits now ruled again? What would happen to the Ipicas, who were Christians now? Javy stopped the motor and guided the boat with a paddle. The current was slow and the water was smooth. Nate carefully opened the satellite phone. Within 2 minutes, he was talking to Josh. "Tell me she signed the letter," Josh shouted. "You don't have to shout, Josh. I can hear you." "Sorry. Tell me she signed it." "She signed a letter, but not ours." "She's dead, Josh. She died 2 weeks ago. Malaria. She left a will, just like her father." "Do you have it?" "Yes, it's safe. Everything goes into a trust. I'm the trustee." "What happens now?" "Nothing happens," Josh said. "Troy Phelan's will is paid out. His estate goes to Rachel. It happens all the time in car accidents. The husband dies one day, then the wife dies the next day. The money goes